Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to our first ever live studio audience of Coffee Chat with Matt. So glad you're all with me today. Does anybody know the history of Coffee Chat with Matt, how we came about? So I'll give you just the quick, since today's all about history and stuff. So it's our 100th anniversary for those of you watching online that aren't here in person. So we're celebrating 100 years here at Wasco Nursery, but for a long time. You can't hear me back there? Really?
Yeah, it's not really out.
Okay.
I can hear.
Okay, good. So we've always had, we have a room on the other side of the greenhouse over here. We have a room that we just call our event space, and we've had classes in there over the years from time to time, and they were always in-person classes, and we had a variety of different topics, and they were always fairly popular. And then of course the dreaded pandemic hit. So 2020, we weren't going to have any classes. Our class schedule that we had planned over the previous winter had all been canceled. And I found myself one morning in the greenhouse with my laptop talking to a laptop. And that was where Coffee Chat with Matt got started. And it has worked out well. And so here we are. And now we're doing one live in person. And what I'm going to do today, we're going to talk about just some great plants. My goal today was to pick some things that maybe are a little less familiar to people. Some of them are going to be familiar to you. Some of them are going to be a lot less familiar. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of Q&A if you have specific questions about these plants or some other plants. I always, whenever possible, like questions. So, a lot of times I'm looking at my phone and people are posting comments or questions on there, and I'll try to answer them live as we go. So today you'll be able to ask those questions in person. So without anything further, we'll get going. Actually, what we'll do is we'll talk, I guess, a little, just real quickly about the history of Wasco. I'll give you a quick history lesson. So as I mentioned, Wasco Nursery is 100 years old now. We started in 1925. Just on the other side of the forest preserve here. So right on LaFox Road, on the east side of the forest preserve, or what is now forest preserve property, is where the nursery started. And then in 1968, the J family moved over here. So the business was started by a guy named Lynn J. He was a farmer, and he started growing some trees and making a windbreak on his property. You can imagine this area at that time, when they came through with plows and everything else, there was not a lot out here. It was mostly just prairie land that was then converted to farmland. So it was very wide open. Obviously very little residents out here, and certainly no industry out here. There was a rail stop in Wasco, what is now the bike trail, the prairie path trail that runs through here. Was the train tracks. And there was a stop in Wasco, and there was a lumber yard in Wasco. So there was a tiny little town right around here. And so Lynn J started growing trees for a windbreak, and some of his farmer buddies from wherever he met them said, hey, we'd like to have some windbreaks on our property. That's a great idea. And so Lynn grew a few more trees and a few more trees, and that was the start of his nursery business. A couple of interesting facts. Lynn started training his son, Bob, who we refer to as Bob Sr., the original Bob, started training him in the nursery business. And Bob went off to World War II, was actually declared dead in World War II. And for 6 weeks, his young wife thought that he had passed away, and then found out that he had not. So then he came back and started adding services to the business. They added what they called tree surgery. So they used to do tree climbing, and filling rotten holes with cement was a practice back then, and all sorts of other stuff. So, but one of my favorite facts is that for about 20 years, Bob and his dad actually trapped creeks around here, and that was their winter income. So they were fur trappers in basically from about 20 miles north to 20 miles south. They trapped all the creeks for mink and whatever else is around here that you did back then. So. But here we are today. We don't do tree surgery or fur trapping anymore. So we do plants. That's what we do best, and that's what we love. So we're going to talk plants now. Let's just jump right in. We're going to start over here with a couple of the bigger items. I've got 3 shrubs and then a lot of perennials. So the first one here is a smoke bush called Winecraft Black. So smoke bush, or smoke tree as some people call it, is a native in the upper Midwest. However, this is a cultivar, of course, with the dark burgundy leaves. There's been several burgundy varieties around for a long time, like Royal Purple and a few others that get quite large. The reason that I brought this up is that Winecraft Black is the first very compact, dark-leafed smoke bush. So it only gets about 6 to 8 feet high, and 8 feet would take a really long time. So 4 to 6 is like a pretty good average landscape size. To get bigger than 6, I think you're probably talking 12 plus years. So it's going to take a long time. They're just showing this little smoky flower. It's a neat flower. It's not something you're going to see from, 20 yards away if it's at the back of your property, but it gets this really cool smoky flower, thus the name smoke bush. But everything about it is more compact, which is the thing I like about Winecraft Black, and its counterpart is called Winecraft Gold. So it has kind of a chartreuse color foliage. But when I say everything is compact, the distance, what we would call the internode distance, which is from like one leaf to the next on the same stem, is much shorter than it is on any of the other ones. So on Royal Purple, you'll have these big sections of branch open with a couple leaves here and a couple leaves here. So it has a really sparse look, where this will have a really dense, kind of a dense habit. It also tends to do very well in the shade, which is not true of most dark-leafed plants. You can do this or the chartreuse colored one, the Winecraft Gold, in mostly shade to full sun. So very versatile. And then the other cool thing about them is their fall color. So this actually turns reds and orange colors in the fall. So fantastic during the summer. It pairs really well, look at that, with bright blue things. So I brought up this next one here. It's called Blue Star Juniper. In general, I'm not a huge juniper fan. So I started here in 1992. My first job was loading cars. At that time, the most popular foundation plant that we had, there were two, spreading junipers, or what we called Fitzers back then. I don't know why they were always junipers, but they just called them Fitzers. And then spreading yews. Those were the two big foundation plants that we used at the time. And the yews were field grown and really heavy, so I hated loading those. And the Fitzers were prickly, and I would get rashes all over my arms grabbing these big field grown junipers and loading people's cars. So I kind of have an aversion, maybe a little PTSD to junipers, but I really do love Blue Star. First of all, it's tiny. It's a very compact juniper. It's also relatively soft. Like it doesn't, a lot of junipers, if you're doing this or rubbing your hand through there, you're gonna, as I mentioned, gonna get a rash. It's kind of prickly. This, although stiff, is not at all prickly. It's a very moundy juniper too, so it doesn't have that like shooting habit that a lot of the other spreading junipers do. It's kind of a little clump forming mound. So really great white kind of texture or coloring to the needle, which almost gives it that steely blue appearance. I love the combination of steely blue things, so that could be like Halcyon Hosta, Blue Star Juniper, anything that has that kind of coloring with burgundy looks really nice. So in the past, I've used these around purple sand cherries, purple or what we call red beech, red purple beech, things like that. Really nice color combination. Dry soil to moderately dry soils. Full sun is ideal for these junipers, although they're more shade tolerant than people give them credit for, but I certainly wouldn't put it in full shade. And they will get about 2-ish feet tall and about 3 wide. So not a very large plant at all, but very cool. And then I brought up one other shrub, and then we're gonna switch gears and start talking about perennials. You may recognize this as a variegated dogwood. There's been one on the market for a long time called Ivory Halo. It's a beautiful variety. We still grow it and sell it. It's really good. So the variegated dogwoods have red stems in the wintertime. They're kind of red-ish now, but red stems in the wintertime, and then that variegated foliage during the growing season. This one is really cool though, because it gets pink and white variegation to it. So it's almost like the tricolored beech. So tricolored beech, if you've watched my videos before, you know is one of my favorite trees. And so if you look kind of inside the plant, you're gonna see some of that pink characteristic in there. In the spring, when this was first leafing out, the whole thing came out pink like that. And then now we're starting to get some cream, but you're getting cream and pink. It has fantastic burgundy fall color. So the green portion is gonna turn burgundy. The pink or cream colored section of the leaf is going to remain pink or cream. So you get this cool two-tone in the fall. So fall color is spectacular. and then the stems will darken up during the fall and winter, so you're gonna have that burgundy or red stem. It is a fairly full-sized red twig dogwood, so you're gonna be in that maybe 6 to 8 foot range. Red twig dogwood benefit from a little extra moisture, so if you've got a super hot, dry location, it might not be the best thing for you, or if you don't water very frequently, it might not be the best thing for you. Lastly, if it's like up high on a berm or something, you probably want to avoid red twig dogwoods, but it's great for that low corner of your backyard where, you know, all the water drains down to, or if there's a, you know, a downspout or some pump or something discharging, it'd be great for that. Otherwise, they're very easy to grow. So it's a great plant. This is called Sergeant Pepper's dogwood. Sergeant Pepper red twig dogwood. So very nice, very nice. This is a new introduction. It came out last year, and kind of the first dogwood to hit the market in a while. Probably for good reason, because most of the other ones, there really wasn't anything too exciting about them. Okay, we're gonna switch gears to perennials. And I brought up some of my favorites. First is the earliest blooming Monarda that grows around here. This is a Monarda called Manarda Bradburana, or Eastern Beebalm, or Bradbury's Beebalm. You'll hear it, any one of those things. So this is perfectly accurate in terms of where the plant should be in the landscape right now. So sometimes, like this one right here, this is, we'll talk about this in a minute, this is a butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. It's gotten a little what we call greenhouse encouragement. So it's a little also what we would call seasonally advanced. So they're not blooming yet in the wild. In my garden at home, they don't even have any flower buds yet. Well, they're little, they're very small. They're like that big. But this is in full bloom in my landscape right now. It is fairly shade tolerant. Monarda do quite well in part shade to mostly sun as long as they get adequate moisture. If it's full sun, they're gonna like a little bit more moisture, but it's a fantastic hummingbird plant. It is a fantastic bumblebee plant. So there's all sorts of other bees and butterflies that like Monarda in general. So great plant. It has a really nice kind of minty fragrance to the leaf and stem, which makes it deer resistant and rabbit resistant. So at home, I deal primarily with deer. There's a handful of rabbits around for sure, but my primary, the primary feeding characters in my yard are the deer, and they don't touch this at all. So it's been great. And I have some in full sun that get sun kind of midday and on for the rest of the day, hot, intense sun. And I have some tucked underneath an oak, just kind of at the edge of the canopy. And they're doing equally as well. For sure, the one that's in the sun is more compact, dense, and has more flowers. And the one that's in the shade actually looks a lot more like this. It's a little more sprawly and open, which is what's gonna happen when you take a plant and put it in the shade. You tend to get bigger gaps between here so that the leaves can catch more sun from that kind of that indirect light that works its way in. Whereas when it's in the sun, in full sun, it can develop a dense, more compact habit, or fuller habit, I guess is more appropriate. You probably can't see this on camera or in person, but there's tiny little speckles on here. And if you look at each of these flowers individually, they almost look like little orchids. So it's a really cool plant. Asclepias tuberosa, or butterfly weed. This is, we have basically 7 different Asclepias that grow here in northern Illinois. So Asclepias is the milkweed family, and milkweed are the only plant that the larva of the monarch can feed on. So if you're trying to attract monarchs to your yard, the adults can feed on all sorts of stuff, but the larva can only feed on anything in the Asclepias family, including butterfly weed. So it's a monarch host as well as a host for other butterflies. Bright orange, it's the only one with the bright orange flowers. It gets about 18 to 30-ish inches tall and really likes a dry soil. If you've had problems with growing butterfly weed in your yard before, 9 times out of 10, it's because of the heavy clay and too much water. So if you're trying to grow butterfly weed, or if you're gonna try it again, I always tell people add a little bit of sand or a little vermiculite or something that's going to increase the porosity of the soil. So sand works great. I have been fortunate in my home. We have actually a naturally sandy soil at home. So butterfly weed does really, really well for me, where more water-loving species like a cardinal flower or something do very poorly for me because as I joke around with some of the guys here, I have never been accused of overwatering anything in my life. I spend a lot of time here, as you all know, so I'm not doing a lot of watering. So plants kind of, you know, they're going to get maybe an initial watering or two, and then they're on their own. So butterfly weed does really, really well for me at home. And it develops these really cool kind of pointy seed pods. And the seeds actually, if you allow them to, and you've got that drier or more sandy soil, they'll reseed themselves pretty readily. But it is not an aggressive plant at all. Some of the other milkweeds, like common milkweed, for instance, is highly aggressive. It will spread via rhizomes. So rhizomes are roots that kind of run out and then they'll start growing in other places. Butterfly weed does not spread via rhizomes, so you're never going to kind of find it going crazy all over the place. It'll either stay put or it'll reseed itself. And if the soil's adequate for it, it'll grow. If it's not, it just kind of withers away. So that's butterfly weed, and one of my favorites for sure. It goes really, really well with purple stuff. I have one that reseeded itself in the middle of a group of Roseanne geranium, which has a nice kind of lavender purple flower. And I just left it there and it's been beautiful. So it's been a really nice combination for me in that area. This is a meadow sage or salvia called Bumbleberry, kind of a fun name. Bumbleberry I like because it has a more compact habit. There's a lot of variety of salvia on the market, East Friesland and Maynite and Caradonna and a host of others. And honestly, most of them are pretty good, but some of them bloom really nicely and then sort of look like a cat laid down in the middle of it. They kind of flop open and there's kind of a dead space in the middle. Bumbleberry just has a little shorter stem, a little stiffer stem, and just keeps a nice compact habit and tends to be a really good rebloomer. So I like that. I also just tend to like the coloring on it. I like more of these like violety pinky purples instead of the dark purples. That's just kind of more personal preference than anything. This one's pretty short for a salvia, like maybe 16 inches or so. Full sun to part shade and average soils to dry soils on that one. One thing, if you are trying to attract pollinators to your garden, one concept or principle that you should try to follow is to have something blooming basically all the time. So I always like to recommend some later blooming plants for people because a lot of people, just as a general rule, do a lot of garden shopping in the springtime and they make all of their purchases at that time of year and it's, hey, that's really pretty right now and that's really pretty right now, and it obviously makes sense. In the fall, though, the pollinators still need something to feed on, and this is a great option for you. This is a Liatris or blazing star. This one's called Liatris aspera or rough blazing star. I also like the name. There's a native nursery up in Minnesota that we get some seed from called Prairie Moon Nursery, and one of their, I think, maybe former workers or associates nicknamed it Button Blazing Star, which I really like the name of because it has these like button-like flowers on it, and there's really nothing rough about the plant, so I don't know where that particular name comes from, but the leaves are smooth, the stems are smooth, and then it's just got that really neat kind of flower stalk with these purple buttons all over it. There's of course a picture on here you can check out later, but it's one of the later blooming blazing stars. So the marsh blazing star and prairie blazing star will bloom kind of midsummer. This is a later summer, like August, September. I've even had in kind of some partial shade, I've had it more like September, October, or early October. So it's kind of a nice later blooming variety. And it likes average soils as well. So marsh blazing star, which there's a common variety called cobalt, that likes more of a moist soil. This one can tolerate just average soils or just kind of whatever you throw at it. It also tends not to be very aggressive at all. Liatris aren't a crazy aggressive native, so it's a good, I call them well-behaved natives. So that's rough blazing star or button blazing star. And speaking of natives, we'll talk about these two, which are sort of, this is Spagellia, and it goes by the common name of Indian pink. Common names can be a little confusing because there's about 5 different plants in the US that are named Indian pink. It just depends upon where you're at. So if you're in the Front Range, like out in Colorado, they've got a variety of plant out there that they call Indian pink in the mountains and in the Front Range. And if you go on the west side of the mountains, there's another plant that they call Indian pink over there. So this is the Indian pink that we grow here. This is a cultivar. It's called Little Redhead. and it's probably, I think, one of the best introductions in the perennial market in a while. The plant in general, Spigelia marilandica is its name, is actually very endangered and rare in the wild. But this is a cultivar that was bred for its profuse blooming. So bright red flowers with a yellow interior, and it's kind of a tubular flower, which makes it a great hummingbird plant as well as a butterfly plant. So, you know, things with tubular flowers, whatever is pollinating them needs either a long tongue or something to get the pollen, or nectar rather, from down inside the flower. So great pollinator plant, and can grow in full sun to full shade. Now, if it is crazy hot, dry, full sun, I'd probably say it's not your ideal choice. There's other plants that will do better in full hot blazing sun, but it is quite sun tolerant. But I have it in deep shade at home doing quite well. And it's also blooming earlier than normal right now. So this is normally a late June bloomer. So it's just blooming a little earlier than normal. But mine are up, they're about that tall, and the buds are not even, you know, again, hard to see for all of you, but I don't even know if the buds are this big yet showing any red. I think they're still just green, but they're in there, and you know, just a couple more weeks. If we start getting some warmer weather, maybe that'll happen a little bit faster. This has been a really strange year. We're still, I looked at some of us before off camera were talking about Morton Arboretum earlier, and they send us a resource called the Growing Degree Day Calculator I think it's every other week. But we're about only 2/3 of the way to where we were at last year at this time. So Growing Degree Days is just a calculator that we use to determine what's happening kind of in the plant and insect world. So they're indicators that tell us when it's the right time to spray for this or to watch out for that. And last year at this time we were at like 875 growing degree days, and we're at like 560 something right now. So considerably far behind. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that things are delayed. So if you're used to seeing something happening, you know, that normally like, oh, this plant in my garden blooms every year Father's Day weekend, why isn't it blooming? That's probably why. I will tell you that there are some plants that did not get the memo that we're behind. My coneflower at home are totally budded and looking amazing. They don't normally bloom until the end of June, maybe even early July sometimes, and they look great. Both my regular purple coneflower as well as my pale purple coneflower have big buds. They're actually already, pale purple coneflower already has purple showing, and they look fantastic. So they didn't get the memo, but there are other plants that are definitely way behind. So don't freak out if you see things that are just not as far along as you'd normally like. Spagellia does, as I think mentioned, like a little more moist soil. It doesn't need like insanely moist soils, but just a little extra moisture. But it also doesn't do well if you have like a really wet location. So if it's a truly like standing water, sump pump discharge or something like that, it's not gonna love that. But really cool plant. There's a similar variety that we have called Ragin' Cajun, which it looks just like this, but with a slightly more orange. I think they're hard to tell apart, but a little more orange color to it, but they're both great. So that's, this one is Little Redhead Indian Pink. This is called Narrow Leaf Blue Star, or Amsonia hubrechtii. Great perennial, probably one of my favorites. This is maybe one of the easiest tall perennial plants to grow. You can see why they call it Blue Star, although they are kind of very pale blue right now, but nice star-shaped flowers. This is native to basically like Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, maybe the southern portion of Illinois. So not quite native here in northern Illinois, but it does really, really well for us. It gets I checked mine at home this morning before I came, and it's full grown. It's in full bloom right now. It has been for probably 3 weeks, and it's about that high. So it has this great ferny textured foliage that looks really nice even when it's not in bloom. The foliage still looks great, which is one of my favorite things with perennials. When it looks good even when it's not in bloom, it's kind of a no-brainer, because then the plant looks great, and then when it's bloom, it's like, oh man, that looks incredible. And then the rest of the year it still looks nice with that ferny texture. And then in the fall, it'll turn golden and copper tones. So not all perennials have great fall color. Of course, some just sort of turn to mush at the end of the year. But Amsonia, this particular one especially, has great fall color. So it reseeds itself a tiny bit. You'll have these kind of long seed pods, real narrow seed pods on it. If you want to try to spread them around, you can. Otherwise, it's not an aggressive plant at all. And as another benefit, it has a very milky sap, very similar to milkweed, which makes it not a fan favorite for deer or rabbits. So very animal resistant plant. I've never had to worry about either of the animals munching on that for me. So narrow leaf blue star. We'll keep moving along. Another kind of native influenced plant. This is a Jacob's ladder called Stairway to Heaven. So creeping Jacob's ladder is a woodland native here. Great low plant, another plant that the deer won't bother. Rabbits rarely bother it, and loves shade to partial sun. This particular variety, Stairway to Heaven, has this really unique white variegation to it, which also comes out kind of pink in the springtime. So great early color. And then it just finished its bloom. There's actually like one little stray petal. Oh no, that's actually Beebalm, never mind. It's a blue flowering perennial that just finished its bloom season. So it basically bloomed all of May and kind of finishes up in early June. But great, hardy, low spreading native. And this particular one, Stairway to Heaven, gets about 16 inches tall, 2 feet wide or so. But again, the foliage color, as I was mentioning before, the foliage looks great all the time, and you just get that added benefit of the purpley blue flowers earlier in the year. And being a very versatile plant for sun or shade, or most part sun to mostly shade, you can plant it in a lot of different locations. So it's a great border plant. It looks really good with bigger leafed plants. So if you've got a shady section with hostas, it's going to look really nice with that. If you've got a part sun location with some grassy plants, it's going to look really nice with that. So that one's called Stairway to Heaven. The flowers are also slightly fragrant, which is nice. It's not anything you're going to smell from 10 feet away, but it does have a nice fragrance to it. So speaking of fragrant plants, this, you might even be able to smell it from there as I kind of wave my hand through it. This is called Hummingbird Mint, or Agastache, or hyssop. So as the name suggests, it is a wonderful hummingbird plant. Again, has that tubular flower. This one's called Kudos Coral. There's a whole series called Kudos. There's a Kudos Yellow and a Kudos Red, Kudos Coral. Obviously, the flower color is really the only difference in the series. I really like the coral one, but honestly, they're all fantastic, but really nice, very minty, kind of licoricey type flavor. This is the anise hyssop, is the kind of the native plant that's in the same family. So kind of got that licoricey, minty fragrance to it, which makes it, again, deer and rabbit resistant. It also is a natural mosquito repellent. So this is both something that you could just use in and around your patio or deck to keep the mosquitoes away, or you can take leaves and kind of crush them up and rub them on your hands and arms if you're out working in the garden. It actually works quite well. I do that with some lemongrass and citronella, which we sell. I'm not a fan of the chemical insect repellents because I'm outside, as you know, pretty much every day of the year, and so I don't want to be spraying DEET on me all day long every day. And so the botanicals are a great way to at least help the situation. So that's Kudos Coral, Hummingbird Mint, dry soil. Definitely does not want to be overwatered. If you've lost these before, it's probably from overwatering. But otherwise, pretty reliable plant and long bloom time. So a lot of people ask me for a perennial that will bloom basically all season long, and I always tell people most perennials just kind of have a shorter season of bloom time. But hummingbird mints are one that will bloom pretty much until frost. Otherwise, you need to kind of get into the roses to have something that'll bloom all summer long. But these really do bloom for a long time. All right, just a couple others. So I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but we're going to move into some shadier plants. This is called fairy hair. It's a type of goat's beard. So goat's beard is a plant that maybe some of you are familiar with, but this is a really unique cultivar. So you can see it's got this beautiful white flower that's just starting. So it's going to typically bloom in June and into early July. The regular goat's beard is a very tall perennial, about maybe 3.5 to 5-ish feet tall. So foliage on the bottom with these long flower stems with little white bottle brushy flowers like this up at the top. This is a very small version of it with this really unique foliage, this really thread-like foliage. So that's where it gets the name fairy hair. Even if it wasn't in bloom, that would look really nice. The flowers obviously are fantastic. So this is gonna pair really well with hostas, really well with coral bells of any color. You know, the purple coral bells or any of those, it's gonna work really well with that. So shade to early, like morning sun is great, but definitely not an afternoon sun or hot sun plant. But that's fairy hair, and this is about as tall as it gets, you know, 18, maybe 24 inches when it's really well established. So that's fairy hair. And then this is a Heartleaf Bergenia called Peppermint Patty. Again, just a fantastic foliage plant. This also finished blooming. It's one of the earlier plants to bloom in the garden every year. It develops this little flower stalk in the center with these nice purpley pink flowers on it, and it's quite attractive. But then the foliage is really, I think, the real show. It's got this very waxy foliage, which is basically impervious to just about everything. It rarely has any insect or disease issues. It rarely has animal issues. So you usually just have this really nice, waxy, glossy foliage, which will turn a burgundy or red color in the wintertime or in the fall, which is really cool. It is a semi-evergreen, which is also kind of unique. So it gives some color very late into the year or sometimes even all winter long in a mild winter. If we have a rough winter, it just kind of turns all brown and mushy. You just kind of trim it back and it grows back. But otherwise, a lot of times you will see last year's foliage, you know, kind of underneath here. So it's probably hard to say for sure, but this is, you can see some nice new leaves. They're lighter green, they're coming up in here. I would guess that a few of these bigger, darker leaves are last year's foliage. That's also why they're looking a little torn up. I mean, they've literally been around since last year. And so as we're handling them and as they're growing, you're gonna have some of that happen. If that ever does, you can snip those leaves out. Otherwise, just kind of let it go and they're gonna be great. So that's Peppermint Patty Bergenia. And last, but certainly not least, is the Hillside Beauty Black Bugbane. This is a plant that has gone through a name change, a botanical name change. I knew it as Semicifuga racemosa, which is a snake root or bugbane, and then they've changed the name to Actea. They believe it was in the wrong family or whatever. So you'll see it listed as both depending upon who's updated their resources and who hasn't. But this is a wonderful shade plant. This is another one that's gonna go great as a background plant to hostas or larger leafed plants like the Bergenia. It gets about 4 feet tall, so you've got this dark purpley foliage up to about 2.5-ish, maybe 3 feet. And then you'll have this flower stalk that sticks up which is really long, narrow with this big white kind of bottle brush flower on it later in the summer. So it's a great summer bloomer, but at home in my landscape right now, it looks just like this, and it's beautiful just as is with that dark foliage and the burgundy or purpley stems. So you kind of see those stems in there. It's got the, you know, dark color along with a lighter kind of, this is what we would call a glaucous powder. It means white. Glauca in Latin is white, and so that this powder actually rubs off. It's the same thing that forms on blue spruce that makes blue spruce white, or blue rather. It's a white powder that forms on the needle. So if you take the needle of a blue spruce and rub it, it'll rub right off and it'll be green. So they developed that glaucous powder, which is really cool. And then they've got this burgundy foliage, which looks fantastic. So the new leaves are gonna come out green, and then it's gonna turn burgundy as those leaves mature. And then the more, or the later on in the year it gets, the darker that foliage is going to get, where it develops an almost chocolatey brown blackish color, thus the name Hillside Black. So great perennial plant. This is one that is not drought tolerant. I always caution people on this one. So it's kind of the opposite of the butterfly weed that we were talking about early. So this one hates to get completely dry, where that one wants to be typically completely dry once established. The milkweed develops a very large taproot, which makes it very drought tolerant, where this tends to grow in more woodlandy soils, which tend to be nice and rich up top, so that they've never had the need to develop this big deep taproot or big deep root system. So don't let it dry out, and put it in the back, or if you have a very large garden, it's a great centerpiece. You know, if you've got a big area like we're sitting in here, it could be in the middle of the garden with stuff all around it too, but otherwise it's a great backdrop plant for smaller, larger leafed plants in front of it. So those are some of my favorite plants that were looking good and I thought would be fun to talk about now, but I do want to open it up for some Q&A. So if anybody has questions about these particular plants, feel free to ask and I will try to answer them. Yeah.
Are any of those not pet friendly for dogs?
That's a great question. So this is a toxic plant, but I always recommend people, so is the milkweeds are toxic as well, but it would have to be ingested in large quantities. But I always recommend going to the ASPCA's website. They have a wonderful searchable database. So if you've got an animal at home that likes to munch on your plants, I always tell people check that, because you can literally, as you're shopping here, it actually works great on the mobile phone. You can literally like type in, you know, snake root or, you know, milkweed, whatever, and it'll pop up and tell you. So I always caution people on that. If you've got, especially an animal that likes to munch a lot of plants, many plants are listed as toxic, and this is by no means an endorsement to put toxic plants in your yard if you've got animals munching, but a lot of them, even the animal would have to consume a large quantity for it to be toxic. Now there are other plants that are very toxic in very small amounts. Poison hemlock is starting to grow around here. That's an invasive weed. There's a couple across the street at the edge of the forest preserve along Route 64. There's some poison parsnip over there. So, you know, things like that are quite toxic. So you'd want to definitely stay away from those. But good question. Nancy, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. You know what? You've given us so much great information. Did you mention how tall the purple one right there?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, the foliage itself is going to get about 3-ish feet high, and then the flower stalk sticks up in the middle to about 4 to 5, something like that. So the neat thing about, that's a good question. I think I did mention the height, but what I didn't mention is sometimes when I tell someone that a plant gets 4 or 5 feet tall, they're like, oh no, that's way too big. It's going to block my view or whatever. This is not a plant that's a big, bulky 4 to 5 foot tall plant. If you put a viburnum or, you know, something that's going to be 4 to 5 feet, it's going to be 4 to 5 feet and full from top to bottom, and it's going to hide everything. But this is a plant that, first of all, even just the foliage itself, you can kind of see through it a bit, but it's not going to be 5 foot, the plant itself, it's just that flower stalk. So you're going to be able to see through, so it's really going to look nice and add that architectural element and height that you might not get out of some smaller plants. So really good question, thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
Amsonia,
Mm-hmm.
you had said that it's native Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Southern Illinois.
Yeah.
And then we're Northern Illinois. So
Yep.
is that a perennial here?
It is, very, very much so. Yeah, exceptionally hardy.
Okay.
It's done extremely well in my garden at home. We redid the garden at the north end of the building a couple years ago. We used to have some out there that was doing really, really well, but we redid the whole thing. But I have one very large one at home that's been in the ground for, I would guess, 6 years now. And it's big. It's about this big around and about that high, and has done really, really well for me. Yeah.
My other question is on that fancy Sergeant Pepper
Yeah.
dogwood.
Mm-hmm.
So red stems, how does one keep red stems? Are you the pruning thing?
Great question, thank you. So the question is, how do you keep the red stems in a dogwood? If you've ever tried to grow red twig dogwood, oftentimes you'll find that by the couple years in the ground, the stems are starting to get quite large. They're starting to get brown or gray, sometimes black. Black is a canker disease, but most often as they get about that diameter or maybe the size of your thumb or larger, they start to lose that red characteristic. So you can do one of two things, and they both work really well. You can lop the entire plant off at the ground every couple of years and allow it to grow back. The juvenile stems are what are going to give you that bright red color. So those old, very mature, thick stems don't often provide that color at all. The other option is to do what I call a rejuvenation pruning, which means every year or every other year you go into the plant and you prune out anything that's like the diameter of your pointer finger or larger. That way you're never having any stems, or rarely having stems larger than your finger, thus, allowing the plant to continually regrow with smaller, younger juvenile stems. But I know it sounds drastic, but it really does work well to lop the whole thing off at the ground and just allow it to grow back, and you'll get the red stems every year. The interesting thing is once established, they'll grow back to almost full size their first year. So on red twig dogwood, it's not uncommon on a nice healthy one to cut it down and have the stems grow back to 4 feet in one season. That's not at all uncommon. So but it's a great question, and you're right, because there's actually not too many things that are uglier than an old, nasty red twig dogwood that, you know, is starting to develop canker. Canker is very common in red twig dogwoods around here, and so if it's not, the best way to treat it is just to consistently remove those big, thick stems, and then you're just kind of avoiding that issue. So, great question. Any other questions I can answer? Okay.
So some of those older smoke trees around here, I don't know if it's because they're exposed, but you see like a lot of die-off.
Mm-hmm. So there is a problem that smoke bush can get called Verticyium. It's actually a native fungus here. It lives in our soil. It's completely natural. And I don't know that there's a good answer or reason why some plants get it and some don't. There's a whole list of plants. There's a great resource on Cornell's website and on Purdue's website for plants that are resistant to Verticyium if you've ever had that as an issue. But Verticyium basically acts like cholesterol does in our veins. So the fungus gets into the vein of the plant and then it clogs up the veins, and thereby stopping the flow of water from the root system up to the upper portion of the plant. And so it sort of causes like a little mini heart attack for that branch or section. So it is something that can be trimmed out. I always caution people, if you're trimming out a plant that has Verticyium, to sterilize your pruning shears with either rubbing alcohol or a mixture of bleach and water. But the best, there's no cure for it, there's no known treatment because it's interior to the plant. But trim it out, sterilize your shears. I don't know if it's just because of the size of the plant or that it hasn't been around quite as long, but I haven't seen that happening in Winecraft. I don't know that I'm not telling you that it's resistant to it at all, but I haven't seen it happening in that. But it happens oftentimes in maples. We see it in redbuds. There's a lot of plants that can get Verticyium. But it's the characteristic of Verticyium is what we call flagging. So you'll just have, you know, an otherwise healthy plant with just a branch that just, the leaves just, they stay on, but they just turn brown. And it happens typically very quickly. So sometimes people say it happens overnight, but a lot of times it's, you know, the plant looked fine. We were gone for the weekend or gone on vacation for the week. We came back and this whole branch is brown. And that's almost always Verticyium wilt. Yeah. Any other plants you can answer? Yeah. Yeah, you just cut it out. If it's affecting the main stem or something, the plant's probably going to have to be removed and replaced. And if you replace it, we always recommend putting something that's resistant to the Verticyium wilt back in there. If you have to put the same thing back in, then we recommend removing the soil from around the root ball and planting something new and just bringing some fresh soil in. But again, it is native here, so it's not something that you can necessarily get rid of all the time. And there are plants that just, you know, maples and whatever, that just grow with it for years and years and years and never have any problem. And why one plant tends to have an issue with it and not others, there's really no good answer. I can tell you that there's a lot of sugar maples on the market. You know, sugar maple is native here. We grow a cultivar called Green Mountain. And the reason we have chosen that one, I've probably tried 5. Fall Fiesta sugar maple, Commemoration sugar maple, Legacy sugar maple. All of those had more issues with Verticyium wilt in the nursery than Green Mountain ever did. And so it was just kind of a no-brainer for us to eliminate those varieties from the lineup and stick with Green Mountain. So a lot of times people will come in and ask for some of those other ones, and that's what I tell them is, you know, my experience is it just doesn't do as well here, and it tends to get that Verticyium fungus. I think this guy might have a question.
Circling.
I know. We're hanging out in his home. These are native carpenter bees. So they have chosen to make their home in our brown pergola here. And we don't spray for them or do anything. So we just let them do their thing. And they're completely not aggressive. And as far as I know, they don't even have a stinger on them. But they just buzz around here all the time and just do their thing.
I've got a general question.
Sure.
Not related to those plants. But
yeah.
Everybody knows in the last week or so we've got wildfire smoke.
Yeah.
In the air, and they're warning people to stay in.
Mm-hmm.
Do the trees and plants care that there's wildfire smoke?
Not much. They really don't. So the question was with the wildfire smoke, things like that, does that affect plants? And the answer basically is no. It would have to be very, very prolonged. I can tell you I've had one case that I know of where smoke has damaged plant material around here. Not wildfire smoke, but it was actually just down the street at the Lodge restaurant when it was formerly the Lodge restaurant. And they had wood burning fire pits in front of the restaurant, and they would burn burn the wood every night for people to make s'mores. And it was a great idea. But over the course of time, there were several pine trees that had been planted nearby, and it just slowly killed them. And I'm quite sure that it was just either, I don't know if it was necessarily carbon monoxide poisoning per se, but for sure it was smoke related. They were far enough away, it was not heat related, but it definitely was smoke, and it was just always blowing up into them, and then they just slowly kind of died out over time. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a stand of evergreens, and the bottom branches are turning
Okay.
brown.
Okay, a stand of evergreens with the bottom branches turning brown. Are they spruce? Do they have short, stiff needles? Yeah. Okay. So hard to say without seeing it for sure, but I can give you my best guess. There's a disease going around our area called rhizosphere and needlecast. It's been going on for about 20 years now. It's the reason that we no longer sell Colorado spruce, which is what most people refer to as blue spruce. So needlecast typically starts at the bottom of the tree, works its way up. It's a fungal infection that infects the needle usually around this time of year, or maybe even a little earlier, and then it grows kind of throughout the course of the season, and then it eventually kills the needles, and the needles start to drop. So if it's working its way from the bottom upward, and there's no other good reason why that would be happening, fire damage or some type of herbicide damage or something, it's most likely rhizosphere and needlecast. Needlecast can be sprayed for. You're late to the game for this year, but you start when the new growth is first emerging. On spruce, there's something called a bud cap. It's a little kind of orangey or tan colored cap to the bud, waxy cap, and it falls off as the new growth starts to emerge. When the bud caps fall off, that's when you start spraying for needlecast. And then you make 3 applications about 10 to 12 days apart with a systemic fungicide. We use Infuse, which is something called chlorothalonil, but that's a good product for it. But it's kind of a forever thing. You just have to keep doing it. But again, that's the reason we don't sell Colorado spruce anymore, because that's become so endemic in our area that it's just not worth selling. A beautiful plant, was actually our best-selling evergreen for, maybe the first 75 years of our company's existence. The Colorado spruce was the best-selling evergreen we had, but we had to drop it about 20 years ago because that problem became so problematic in our area. Yeah.
I have sort of a follow-up question on that. I've seen evergreen trees where the lower branches almost touch the ground.
Yeah.
And I've seen other people trim them maybe a foot or 2 feet up.
Sure.
Is that best practice or pros and cons, or does it depend on the type of evergreen?
Yeah. So if the evergreen branches are laying on the ground, should they be pruned up? It's really personal preference, and it does depend a little bit on the type of tree. For instance, Norway spruce, it's very common for them to lay on the ground, and it never seems to bother them ever. Same with some of the other, like Austrian pine, which have their own set of issues, but the branches laying on the ground doesn't seem to bother them at all. Now, on some things like Colorado spruce, if you're trying to avoid needlecast, things like that, it would be best practice to raise that canopy up a little bit to allow some better airflow. So airflow is one of the best things you can do to prevent needlecast on a susceptible tree. And so removing those lower branches and allowing some air to circulate better, whether it's a whole row or a single tree, is going to help the tree. There's really no downside other than aesthetics to removing those lower branches. You can go as high as you want. If you go out into, say, Colorado spruce, where they're native in the Rocky Mountain areas, sometimes you'll see them in open areas on a sunny hillside, and they'll be branched all the way to the ground. And other times you'll see them, kind of along the riverside or something, and the branches are they didn't get trimmed. They naturally trimmed them, thinned themselves out, but they're up, 20, 30 feet. So it's just personal preference from there on. Yeah, you're welcome.
And
Yeah.
follow up to the blue spruce. So do you have blue blue spruce shrubs or ornamentals, that varieties now that we can grow without getting the needle cast, or what is the disease where they die from the top down?
Okay, yeah, so two questions, both very good questions. The disease where they die from the top down is another disease called Cytospora canker. Canker is treatable, but it's very difficult to treat. It's another one of those diseases like Verticyium that's, you know, kind of inside the trunk of the tree, so it's very difficult to treat. So that's Cytospora canker, but there are some treatments for it. The first part of your question is what could we plant as a replacement, or are there blue spruce varieties that are resistant to it? So all of the Colorado spruce, which is Picea pungens, technically can get needle cast. The brighter blue varieties tend to be a little more resistant to it. So some of the dwarf varieties like dwarf globe blue spruce or avatar, or a few of those, tend to be pretty resistant, but it's not you know, a guarantee by any means. That being said, there are some really great blue varieties that we've been working with that are not Colorado spruce that are more resistant. So many people are familiar with a tree called Black Hills spruce. It's been around for a long time. It's a white spruce. White spruce are native to the upper Midwest, up into the Dakotas and whatnot. Very, very durable trees, very hardy trees, but more tolerant of the humid summers that we have in the plains and here in the Midwest than, say, the Colorado spruce, which is a, you know, Rocky Mountain tree and likes it high and dry. So Black Hills spruce, there's a new variety called Whiskey Blue Hills, which is really, really nice. Very bright blue color. We've just started adding that to the lineup. I really like it a lot. It'll be a while before we'll see it in big sizes and in bigger numbers, but great tree. There's also a tree that looks really similar to Colorado spruce called a Myers spruce. It's Picea myeri, which is resistant or seemingly resistant to the disease. Has it not quite as blue as Colorado blue spruce, but quite blue and really a good looking tree. So those would be my best two recommendations. There's also a Norway spruce called Paul's Select, which is another one that we just started growing. Paul's Select is bright blue, soft needle, little shorter needle. And Paul's Select, I believe, is going to be maybe a dwarf or dwarf-ish plant. It's definitely not going to be a full-size Norway spruce like straight species is, but Norway spruce is very resistant or maybe completely resistant to needle cast. Yep.
The dwarf varieties too.
Yeah, the dwarf globe spruce and yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? All right.
How about those blue fir trees?
Yeah, so like white fir or what's known as concolor fir is resistant to needle cast. It does not get needle cast at all. It's a fantastic tree. It is very tricky to propagate, very tricky to grow initially, but once you get it in the ground and kind of over that first year hump of being transplanted, they do great. It's a beautiful tree. It's a very large tree. It takes a long time to get very large, but they're beautiful. They're one of my favorites, and it's unfortunately we inherited when we bought our house here in Campton Hills, which is 8 years ago. We inherited, I think, a dozen. It's probably a few more than that, actually. It was more than a dozen. Full size, like 30-plus-year-old Colorado blue spruce. So I have had the unfortunate task of removing many Colorado blue spruce that had the needle cast disease. I still have a few left, which we're slowly getting rid of. I wish that we had concolor fir. That would, if I could go back 30 years, that would be the plant that I would have put in their place because they're beautiful. Once established, they have next to no disease or insect issues. So it's a really good one. There's some dwarf varieties too, like Blue Cloak is really cool, and a few other ones. There's one silver something. What's that? We've got a new one. It's a kind of mid-sized Swift Silver is what it's called. That one's really cool too. It's a really bright, almost whitish blue concolor fir. So that's AB's concolor. That's a really good one. Yeah. All right, well, thanks for being here today. There's lots of fun activities planned throughout the day. If you haven't already seen it, there's some schedules posted around, so feel free to stay all day or come and go as you please. We were doing nursery tours, hayride tours, which are, I think, starting at 11. Don't quote me on that. Kind of in the back or west lawn area, so it's west of our west parking lot, and there's lots of other stuff going on. So thanks for being with us for our 100-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.